So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Daniel Burgos. I work at the Universidad Internacional de La Rioja in Spain, in Logroño, the International University of La Rioja, which is an open university, in fact, 100% online. And we have a chair on e-learning sponsored by, hosted, by UNESCO. So in the context of this UNESCO chair on e-learning, they ask us to contribute to the World Conference that is happening right now during this week in Spain, in Barcelona. So I will share briefly the website where we have posted the information about the conference and also about these seminars, because we have organized a set of seminars. There are 4 seminars in a row. This is the first one. I will introduce the seminar right now, and later on you have 4 other seminars, one every hour. Okay, so the first one is focused on education in times of crisis. I will talk about this a little more now. The second one is about artificial intelligence and academic performance. The third one is about open education. And the last one is in Spanish, focused on Latin American participants. And it will deal with digital transformation at the university in higher education. Okay. The first seminar is about education in times of crisis. And we have a selected group of experts. All of them are very kind, because I know they're very busy. And also this pandemic situation is going through a number of difficult situations like COVID, post-COVID, and friends, and a number of things, okay? So thank you so much for being here. You're always supportive to any initiative that we put up together. The panelists here are professor, doctor, well, all of them are professor, doctors, or professors and doctors, so I will stick to the names, okay? Anita Tabaco from Politecnico di Torino. You have the full affiliation there on the screen, so you can read it by yourself. Also, Jaco Oliver from Northwest University, John Mason from Charles Darwin University in Australia, South Africa first, Torino, Italy in the beginning. Catherine Gwynpenny from Coventry University in United Kingdom, and finally Saida Fune from An-Najah National University, Palestine. In this group, there is a unique feature that actually really connects all of the participants, is that you actually have field experience on education in times of crisis, okay? Because of a number of reasons, because of the pandemic, because of your country, because of whatever natural or man-made disaster that happened. So you will speak from your heart. You will speak from your experience. And this, I think, is really priceless for the people that are listening to this session. So I thank you all for being here. This will last until 2:45 in Central European time, summer time, so 40-45 minutes approx. We will run the session in the following way. The first round to all of you, just for a 2-3 minute opening speech, opening statement about what you think most relevant about education in times of crisis, and later we will try to entangle in a lively discussion for around 20-30 minutes about the topic. This session is being recorded, and it will be also uploaded later on in the same website that I've posted there in the discussion. So thank you so much again to the participants, to the speakers, to everyone to be here, and let's see we have a good show, okay? So I will start with Anita Tabaco, because I'm aware that Anita is in a maybe not completely reliable connection, and maybe she should go a little earlier, as she said before. I want to give her priority, so we are sure that we listen to what she has to say, okay? So Anita, if you are so kind, the floor is all yours for 2-3 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel, and hi to everyone which is connected to this online workshop, let's say. Okay, I will try to just to underline 2 or 3 questions that are strictly related to the subject of this workshop. So let me say that in the past, we have had many local crises, while 2020 was a turning point, because this crisis, I mean, the COVID-19, gradually became a global one. I do not want to dwell on the measure that different nations have taken with various limitations to daily life. But of course, I want to underline that these limitations have heavily influenced the work activity, especially of the female gender. And I will refer to Italy, mainly to Italy, a nation that immediately after China suffered a sudden impact at 360 degrees. So we were the first one, and this was, of course, not easy because we didn't know exactly what to do. So from one day to the next, everything stopped. Was end of February 2020, work in general, schools, daily life, all kinds of activities. Only hospital have suffered an unscheduled and hardly manageable assault. No one knew what exactly to do. So let's focus on schools and university especially. So from one day to the next, the entire community, students and teachers, had to learn to interact in a completely different way, no longer face-to-face, but only online. And it was really incredible how quickly everyone adapted to a modality that was not at all usual, at least in most cases. Of course, like in UNIR University is the normal way, but this was not in general the case. So today, I think we have to ask mainly two questions. What we have learned after 2 years? And how can this experience be made useful in the future? Because we cannot forget what happened. So as for the first question, I think we all understand the strength and the weakness of teaching online. So it is, of course, necessary to treasure what has been learned, but it is also not reasonable to do everything, at least in my opinion, to be done online if it is possible to teach and learn face-to-face. Furthermore, it must be clear that just a transliteration of the way of teaching is not enough. And to teach effectively online, it is necessary to change the way one is interacting with students. So let me very briefly answer at least what I think about the second one. So how to make useful what we have learned. It should be clear that we professors, at least I'm talking we Italians, must really change our way of teaching. It is necessary to get closer to new technologies, to exploit the communication formats of our students. And of course, this has to be done without giving up to the accuracy and the final preparation to be ascertained. So coming to the end, I think that face-to-face, when it's possible, is preferable. But online has taught us a lot. And so mainly the need for a continuous renewal on the way in which the knowledge is passed on to the new generations. So this is the two questions that I'm raising and that I think are important for all of us. Thank you
so much, Anita, for your insightful questions. I will leave the floor now to our colleague, John Mason, and we'll come back later. I'm just writing the questions. I will just later cross questions between all of you, okay? So John, any minute, please take your 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Anita, for starting things off. It's great to have you distill those few questions out of your assessment of the situation we're in. I've got a few comments here. Firstly, from a global perspective, I have a sense that we're actually living through a time of multiple crises. Yes, we're living through the pandemic, and we will continue to do so for some time yet. I don't think it's over. That brings with it many opportunities for education, as well as challenges, of course. But I also think, in terms of the multiple crises that we're living through at the moment, we're living through a crisis, an ongoing crisis of trust in public institutions. We're going through a crisis in terms of governance systems, political systems, whereby we're seeing a new standoff between autocratic systems and democracy. This is a big deal on the world stage at the moment, and it's potentially having massive consequences. I think we're having a crisis in terms of the spread of misinformation across the planet, and that's been happening probably for about 5 or 6 years. I think back in 2016, the Oxford Dictionary identified post-truth as the word or the term of the year, and I still feel the reverberations of that taking place. And moreover, while this war is taking place in Ukraine at the moment, we might be witnessing the news about the military war, but it's interesting to observe that behind that there is actually quite a significant cyber war taking place, and it to me signals another potential crisis for us. I teach in the area of digital technology and education, and I'm often asking my students to think about a potential future scenario, not so distant, that the next pandemic might in fact be digital. What to do then? So during the pandemic, the digital environment has been our savior to connect us and to help us keep the education systems running. But we may be at this point in human history whereby we have a whole new kind of warfare erupt upon us. So there's just some first thoughts I have about the global situation, but I'd like to also contrast that with one really important question I'd like to add to your questions, Anita, which I agree with. But my particular question is, crisis for whom? And I ask this question because in Australia, we have all sorts of challenges associated with reconciliation between the colonial settlers of the country and the indigenous peoples who have been there for 60,000 years. Okay, and so only in the last 15 years, all our governments have got together, a council of Australian governments have come together to try to deal with issues associated with closing the gap in terms of educational outcomes, health outcomes, all these sorts of outcomes. And so arguably there's been a crisis in education in Australia for Indigenous peoples for a very long time since colonialism took place. So I just leave that there. That question I think is important. Often when we're talking about global issues, we sometimes forget the importance of the local situation. Thank you, Daniel.
Okay, thank you so much, John, also for being here. I know that it's been difficult for you, so I appreciate double. Professor Saida, what do you have in mind? What can you share with us?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Professor Daniel. I'm glad to be with you all. And I'm going to talk from someone who lives all her life under a crisis. Not only the last pandemic, but I was born under a crisis in Palestine for the last 75 years. It was under a crisis. And we have the challenge of thinking about our education. What are the priorities for our education for our children? Professor Daniel, if you allow me, I just want to present one slide, just a photo, if that's possible.
Of course, you can do it anytime.
Thank you. If you can look at this picture, this is a Palestinian child who his house was demolished, and now he is searching for his toys, trying to normalize his life, going back to his toys. Sorry for sharing this photo, but this will take me to think with you about, do we need in crisis situation, what type of education that we need? Do we still need the same education in normal life for children living under crisis, or are we talking about different type of education? It's still here in crisis, the feelings all the time is we are talking about fear, talking about anger. These are the feelings about uncertainty. Myself, I have lived through all these three feelings for long hours, days, months, years. And what I want to present now, that I think when we are talking about education in crisis, we are searching for different type. We are searching for different meanings. Children are searching for hope. They are searching for better life, good life. They are searching for security and safety. They look at education as a tool for better future. They feel that the determination. We look generally children in education, of course, they lose access to education, but the community usually, I'm talking from my experience, the community usually try to find ways to sustain the education of their children in a different way. So education in a crisis is not only a human right, but it is usually a fundamental human right, but in a different way from the normal life. So now my question is, sorry to ask a question, maybe you should, I should receive a question, but here my question, if you all agree with me that the priorities for education in crisis is very different from the priorities for normal education. So people, I look all the time at the standards of education for crisis, for emergency education, and I found the international standards. I found that maybe we need to make it more localized. So each crisis is unique. Each crisis has different ways of responding to it. So having the international standards is very good, but also we need to localize these standards according to the local situation. To finish my speech in 4 points. Number one is principles to respond to crisis and how to plan for it. Just to tell you about the last the pandemic. We were not, as a Palestinian, we were not very much surprised with the pandemic because we have lived in a crisis for many years. So we were able to deal with it. This is the good news. But how to plan for it? We need to first prioritize our needs. What are the needs? We need to talk, we need to plan for each case as a unique case because each country, each community has different needs. We need the community work. It's not only on the formal level, the work should be, also it should be on the community level. And we need to keep in mind all the time that there are some groups that are more affected in a crisis than others that we need to look after more, like children, especially the girls, and people with special needs. Usually these two groups are more ignored during the crisis. To end with, we need to have the balance between the priority of education in general and the priorities of education in a crisis situation according to the needs of the country itself or the group that are affected. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Saida, so much. I have written down a couple of questions that I will come back later to. Thank you for that. Professor Olivier Jaco, how are you doing in South Africa? What can you tell us?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Prof. Daniel and colleagues. I must say, first of all, when considering education in times of crisis, in South Africa, historic divides between rich and poor and varying degrees of access to quality of education has always been key concerns. And the pandemic actually amplified many of these existing challenges in higher education in South Africa, but also in the region. The sudden move to online modalities and issues around different aspects of access led to an extreme lack of student choices and voices in higher education specifically. Furthermore, assessment has become a highly problematic issue where it might not have been in the past. In terms of access, in South Africa, apart from the major issue of formal access, where quite often in rural areas, access to schools tends to be limited. But when it comes to higher education, there are only that many positions available, and funding is a big issue, especially for the missing middle. Our government supports the very poor, and then of course, in the middle, there's always a section that cannot be supported. But we saw in higher education specifically issues around devices, but more prominent also internet access, especially when students during the pandemic were not able to study on campus. For many of them, this is the only safe space that they would have to study, and going home is maybe not the best option. However, issues around epistemological access, and that is one of the crises we've been having for a longer period of time, and that relates more to being able to access the content, the skills that you need to learn, to become part of the academic practice, in the words of Wally Morrow. This entails building on literacies, which our students quite often don't have, and especially being able to use certain technologies in that regard. Since content and assessment were moved in cases abruptly from the classroom and traditional sources to online spaces, student choices were often limited. Our own research showed before the pandemic that they weren't in any case accounted for, and now it was worse. In addition, continuous assessment in the place of examinations meant increased online assessments, quite often unplanned and unsupported from any research. Furthermore, there was a panic, and there's still a panic around examinations and the ways to eliminate cheating when it comes to examinations. At this point, I think it's essential for us to learn from these experiences and rethink the level of self-directedness fostered through higher education and reconsider the purpose of examinations and assessments. If tests and exams move away from mere assessment of learning, but rather to assessment for learning, and even better, assessment as learning, then the aim is not just the grade, but rather the students learning from the process. This implies assessments that are multimodal, that are authentic, that are done not individually, but collaboratively. In this way, students can become more self-directed in their learning process. In terms of access, it is important to note that knowledge used or created should adhere to the principles of open education. Through embracing, retaining, reusing, revising, remixing, redistributing content, and being aware of the need for localization, we can account for the inclusion of indigenous knowledges, which is really important in the Southern African context, and more importantly for Africa and the global South, work towards the decolonization of the curriculum. And that brings me to bringing the voices of the students. Through approaches like renewable assignments, more student choices and voices can be reflected. I conclude with, we need to see this crucible of crises as a starting point for educational renewal, and not just a period of returning back to that normal people think we had. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you so much for your words. I'm sure that we will come back to the question about the decolonization. of the curriculum. I think that Catherine works very much on that. So the floor is yours, Catherine. How is your voice? Can you speak up? Is okay?
I think I'm just going to be about okay today. But,
okay, good.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for inviting me. And it's so great to hear other respected colleagues sharing their views on the context within which we're doing our research and our education practice. I work in a research centre which is very much focused on global learning and lead a theme which is very much focused on education without boundaries. And I can relate to so much of what's been shared about how what we're researching links into these current crises, these multiple crises, and really this focus on the local and the global. And I think importantly, universities' connected engagement with society, locally and internationally and nationally. And as colleagues have talked about, this trust in our institutions. I think over this last period since the pandemic, we've very much been focusing on diversity and the respect of our respective cultures and identities, especially when learning in the online space, and how to forge collaboration with local and global communities in the online space, and the dialogue and the trust and the shared perspectives and the time and the humility that it takes in order to do that well. We've certainly been looking at ways in which education has to focus on global challenges and the wicked problems that we're faced with, and that we have to do that in collaboration with others. And with that, we really need to think about these new imaginaries for higher education and how higher education bonds itself across other levels of education, across the wider education ecosystem. Absolutely, we are focused on plural ways of knowing, and we've learned such a lot about recognizing the benefit when there's rich diversity of ways of knowing and being and expressing ourselves from around the world. And with that, this opportunity for creating space for democratic design and co-creation, which is not limited by recognition of the past or the present, but this imaginary of future making. And I'm always taken by scholars such as Ram Barnett. He was writing some time ago about how universities need to see themselves anew in forging relationships with our planet, with the world, and to own its place as a legitimate institution in society. And so I think a lot of our work is really trying to relate to this ethically engaged university model, which brings together networks of learners and staff and communities to really think about a co-curriculum, co-teaching, co-credentialing, co-funding, split-site scholarships, transdisciplinarity, to nurture the local-based scholars, but also to share the cross-cultural, the international understandings of how we can really think about higher education and its capacity to be globally rethought, constructed. So I think that's where I'll stop. I think it is very much about the role of our universities as trusted institutions, and not least linked to UNESCO's Futures of Education, Learning to Become initiative. I think that very much speaks to these ideas of the plural ways of knowing, the local, the global, the democratic design, and thinking about our humanity with our planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm taking notes of all of you, and also some of the questions that are reaching to me through a number of channels, because even when I said about the question and answers, I got something from the WhatsApp also, and from the networks too. So I'm trying to combine. I try to combine for 20 minutes or so about these questions. And there is one that is striking me here from Pakistan. Amira is commenting, yeah, our country is always in crisis. So there is no difference between crisis or no crisis. It's our, I don't know, modus of operating all the time. So how can we actually leave the crisis mode using education? What should I use? I was trying to internalize that, I think. let's give specific examples. In addition to our thoughts, which are really nice, let's try to give a good advice to this colleague from Pakistan. If I want to leave the crisis mode because it's my usual daily life, or I am just temporarily here, what we can do? Can we use, I don't know, open resources, as someone said before? Just give me a very good tip, just to these contributors, so they can get a list of ideas to practically implement. The floor is all yours. I will not ask you one by one. It's just, you just raise your voice, speak up, and if there are many people speaking at the same time, I will moderate, but if not, we can speak spontaneously. So please, go ahead, just one very good tip from you.
Well, I'll jump in, Daniel. Thanks for the wicked question, and Saida. Gee, it's hard to respond to making a comment about how. I'm sure you and your community have been searching for that, for an answer, a practical answer, and have tried many things to try to move on from that sense of crisis. So I wouldn't pretend to be able to share any insight to you for your situation, and I can't imagine how difficult that is to be in this perennial cycle of conflict and crisis that you must have been experiencing for such a long time. But having said that, on a personal front, I just, you know, with COVID, with any of these crises, I think we're all presented as individuals and communities with challenges and crises, and the real challenge for us is to somehow transform the crisis or the challenge into an opportunity. And so I'm always trying to be a glass half full person, and to look for the opportunity that might just somehow emerge in the crisis. And recently in Australia, we had you know, incredibly bad wildfires, bushfires that just wiped out so much of our bushland and our wildlife, and you know, it was a terrible tragedy in terms of natural things, and everything was scarred and black and burnt. And then I can see that there's this wonderful metaphor with a lot of the eucalyptus trees. You see all these after 2 or 3 months green shoots just starting to come, and there's this regeneration coming, and there is resilience. There is resilience in human societies. We can learn that from Indigenous peoples. I think resilience is such an important thing, such a wonderful thing to have, and to maybe work continue to work from that basis of being so resilient. We might find some kind of regenerative practice to pursue. I could talk a long time, and I don't want to, but I just want to say a quick thank you, Daniel, for bringing us all together, because what everybody has been saying so far, it all resonates for me, and I want to have conversations with you all after the panel.
I hope that we will. I know that Saida wants to also contribute, but Anita needs to leave because of her connection. So if you don't mind, I will give her priority so she can reflect and comment on the topic or on any other topic that you want related to the discussion, and we will try to integrate it later. Okay, so Anita, all yours.
Sorry, he's not really depending on me. Crisis, let's say, it's very interesting what the Pakistan was saying. We were not prepared to a crisis. That's the main difference. And so we had to invent from one day to another a complete new solution. So I think that, again, we can learn one to another. Probably also our experience will be good for Pakistan or Palestine or whatever crisis, Ukraine, of course. So I think that we have to do our best to take the better that we can from this experience, because as I said at the beginning, this experience was global, which never happened. Usually we had crises here and there, but never all together. And this was the main difference of this case. But again, I think that we can learn from one another experience and try to do our best to work together. And maybe we learn something, and that's not few, is a lot. That's
I hope so. I hope so. Now, wise words. Thank you so much, Anita, and thank you for joining. I know that you have all these troublesome connections, so I appreciate that. Okay.
Thank you, and sorry I really have to leave. Bye.
It's okay. Thanks, Anita. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, let's move on with Saida, who wanted also to reflect on the situation of being in a permanent crisis and giving a good tip on how to live that state.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Daniel. And I agree with Anita and John about what they talked about people experience and learning together, and also about that this is a very hard question, really. I don't know exactly what does it mean, how it looks when you are not in the crisis, because I have not experienced that. For me, I think in Palestine, we try to find ways to deal with the crisis, and I think the same in Pakistan. The main important thing is to put down your priorities, to find, of course, safety is the most important priority. But then when we are talking about education, we need to learn how to build our model for resilience, how to be strong, how to deal with your pain, with your struggle, with your with your fear, how to deal with that, how to accept it in a way in order to find your way for dealing with it. This does not mean that I want to normalize the crisis. No, I am against normalizing the situation. I know that there is some literature talking about that, but I don't agree with that. I believe that we need different skills that in order to deal with the crisis through determination, through education. As an example, maybe that could be reflected on that in Palestine, we believe that education is the tool to deal with the crisis. So the most we learn, the most we express and we share our experience with other people, the most we reflect on our situation and for the international community and for the national, also different parts of the world, the more we feel more confidence, and then we can be able to continue our life. So for reflecting on this hard question, I wish I have a direct answer, but I'm searching for the answer with my colleague from Pakistan. The most important thing is to learn from others, as Anita said. Learn from previous experience, and this also needs to share your experience with others, like what we are doing now, sharing, and this could be done through open resources, through a lot of now, because the world is open, thanks for technology, we have the ability more to share and to learn together in a different way, and this gives us a lot of determination, a lot of resilience strategies in order to continue our life. Thank you.
Thank you, Saida. I will jump now into a Catherine. I will do one thing. I ask you one thing, and so you can join both questions and answer. Okay. So we try to integrate a number of questions from people, but you can do as any politician does. I ask you something and you answer whatever you want. Okay, that's also good. So I have a question here in this panel, talking specifically about diversity, and I think that Jaco and you, Catherine, are very much working on that because of a number of things. Okay, in the case of Catherine, it's part of your main topic there because you work with a number of cultures together. In the case of Jake also, because a number of things. For instance, in South Africa, if I recall correctly, you have 11 official languages. I think it's 11. Okay, so just living life is diversity in practice. Okay, and the point is, with this diversity in mind, education in crisis is something more difficult to address because you have integration of different cultures, different languages, different ways of watching things and experiencing things is something that puts some difficulty on top of whatever the crisis usually brings to the table, or is something good that helps more than hinder whatever happens there? What do you think? Catherine, you were raise your hand, so now you have 2 questions for the price of 1.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the question. Well, I was actually going to come in and talk a little bit about ideas around community engaged scholarship, which is a contested term, perhaps. It's not necessarily just about more access to education and a wider range of people accessing education and education in the community. But I think it's about this importance of being able to understand the inherent wisdom in communities, and that universities aren't the font of all knowledge. And I think in some of our project work, what we've been trying to do is really understand ways to work more at grassroots level to really understand the mindset that enables that sort of reciprocal mutual learning within communities, as opposed to HE considering itself researching for communities. So I think, for example, in one project that we're working with, which brings us in partnership with colleagues in Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia, is looking at frugal ways to co-create education opportunities. And this is, beyond the classroom. This is about engaging with communities, talking about education opportunities through playful learning, but then co-creating opportunities to do that. For example, there's been a development of a playground approach, which has very much been brought together through recycled, frugal approaches to resources and tools and goodwill of community with colleagues across education and community partners and religious colleagues and community and tribal leaders coming together. And I think these opportunities for this shared ways of working and this curiosity to learn together, it brings in diversity, it brings in issues around, how we can look at the future of education and skill development and bringing in young people to be creative and innovative. So I don't know if I'm going off on a tangent, as a politician might, but I think we've been very interested in how we can learn about, from this last period, ways to work together better. And we've had to continue our project work in the online, where we were trying to meet face to face, and how we tried to do that still locally on the ground where we can, but then internationally and online. And that importance of that collegiality and respect that really has to come through. And I guess the sort of that willingness to be not risk averse, to have to be more agile, to know that maybe what we planned with our funders, we have to rethink, and be able to get up good reasons for why. Yeah, I'll stop there, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your thought. I will come back to Jaco now. Finally, what do you think? Diversity is a facilitator in times of crisis, or is a stopper? What do you think?
I'm going to go back to the word crisis, first of all. If you look at the origins of the word, it relates more to decisions than problems. And I think this is where we are currently, is changing our mindset from moving away from it being a problem, the crisis that crises we are living through as you know, in higher education, in various contexts in the world, and definitely also COVID-19, but rather look at what choices we have now, what new novel choices we have. And one of the aspects, as you say here, what about diversity? We need to move away from seeing aspects like multiculturalism and definitely language as being a problem, but embracing it as a resource. Unfortunately, things like the pandemic has caused that students who would typically in classrooms by themselves trans-language and through the use of others understand what is going on in the classroom, that resource was taken away. So now we have to think more creatively in allowing that collaborative spaces online, as it were. And I think we need to be cognizant of the affordances that embracing that kind of diversity could bring in closing the gap from what needs to be understood and what students can do on their own. So in my mind, it's more a matter of embracing the local in localization. And that's where I want to link up with what Catherine said, that quite often it's a matter of higher education taking hands with the community, taking hands with government, with non-governmental organizations, and it's always a struggle. You know, there's so many silos when it comes to these things, and we need to bring in that local into the localization of hopefully open education, but education as it were in general. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. It's a pity that this session just lasts 45 minutes. We need to wrap it up now. I think that your contributions were lovely, as always, and very useful. I thank you all for being here, the participants, of course, and the speakers, people coming from United Kingdom, like Catherine Winpenny, Palestine, Saida Fune, Australia, John Mason, although I think that you are not in Australia right now, Jack Oliver from South Africa, and Anita Tabaco, who got the connection from Uzbekistan, although she's from Italy. So this is really a UNESCO type of contribution from the different corners of the world. I kindly remind you that this session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the link that I posted in the beginning and also through the UNESCO channels. If you go to the UNESCO World Conference, the website, the session will be there also uploaded. Thank you so much again for being here. I would love to meet you face to face and have some coffee tea really soon. John, you want to add something?
I just wanted to say another thank you to you, Daniel. And I really also wanted to say it's one of the things that's coming out of the pandemic is it's shining a light on the very good work of UNESCO and the importance of the sustainable development goals. I think sustainability has become the term of the decade. And so I would like to just congratulate UNESCO for its work and thank you for being part of that.
Thank you so much. With that brilliant note, we close it for now. So have a good day and hope to see you really soon. Okay, cheers.
Thank you so much.